The US Army communicates using carrier pigeons. The first carrier pigeon was used by Noah on his ark. After that, they were used by ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Pigeons were used in early wars, including bringing news of British victory at Waterloo. Carrier pigeons were used for the first time in battle in the Siege of Paris in 1870. Carrier pigeons were continued to be used in war throughout the 20th century. In 1914, World War I began in Europe. The Allied powers, which included France, Great Britain, and the US who joined in 1917, they fought against the Central Powers, including Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. World War I ended on November 11, 1918. Both Allied and Central Powers used carrier pigeons as a form of communication in World War I. They needed a way to communicate that was reliable without wires and couldn't easily be sabotaged by the enemy or break down, like telegraph, telephone, and radio. When the US Pigeon Service first arrived in France in February of 1918, it consisted of 3 officers, 118 enlisted men of the Signal Corps, and a few hundred pigeons donated from France and England.
In developing. So you had the Signal Corps' Hello Girls, right, who were operating telegraphs, telephones at the front. But those were subject to damage, right? You could cut the lines. It was very difficult, right, to keep that modern technology going. And so they find that they can, with great success, use these pigeons to relay messages.
Young pigeons were trained to return to their home loft by soldier trainers. When the bird was able to be released from a location and return to its home loft, it was ready to be used as a carrier pigeon. The birds were taken out with soldiers into battle, and they would be used to send messages back to the home loft. The messages were in a capsule attached to the bird's leg. The advantage of the use of carrier pigeons for message delivery was that they were more successful than messenger soldiers, radio, and telegraph. Communications of that era could easily be sabotaged by the enemy. A pigeon could fly high and could reliably get the message through. So even though they were sometimes shot down, they were the most reliable delivery method of the time, with 95% of the messages they carried being received. The purpose of the homing pigeon service is to ensure a quick liaison where other methods are too slow, unreliable, or when they have broken down between the first-line troops in the command, airplanes, tanks, and the officers for whom they work. An example of pigeon success as message carriers is Jeremy's rescue of the lost battalion. The 77th Division's 307th and 308th Infantry Regiments, led by Major Charles Whitsley, became known as the Lost Battalion after the unit was trapped behind German lines from October 2nd to October 8, 1918. Whitsley's command was equipped with 8 carrier pigeons, which would eventually save them. On October 2nd, about 500 men had no extra ammunition, food, or water. After several attempts on October 3rd to find the 77th Division, they were dubbed Lost. On October 4th, an American plane flew over the position. The division hoped that supplies would be dropped to them, but the pilot thought he was looking at German troops. American artillery began landing on Whitsley's men. They were now being killed by American fire. Private Omar Richards, the unit's pigeon handler, sent out the 8th bird. The pigeon was Jeremy. The note Whitsley wrote attached to Jeremy read, "Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." Jeremy was released and landed on a tree opposite the battalion. 2 men yelled at it, and she finally flew away. 25 minutes later, Jeremy landed at headquarters. The firing stopped. On her flight to headquarters, Jeremy had been hit by German fire 3 times. She was shot through the breast, her right leg, which was carrying the message by a tendon, and blinded in one eye. Even though the message was received on October 4th, it wasn't until the 7th when the lost battalion was found. Finally, on October 8th, the remaining 194 men of the 77th Division were taken back to headquarters. Cher became the mascot of the 77th Division, and she was treated for her wounds, and a wooden leg replaced the one she lost in battle. Cher was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for saving the lives of the remaining men in the lost battalion. She had delivered 12 important messages during her service. She arrived home on April 16, 1919. Cher died on June 13, 1919. Poems, songs, books, and movies were made to describe her heroic act. After the success of using carrier pigeons in World War I, the US Army Pigeon Service found a home at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where pigeons were trained for future wars, including World War II and the Korean War.
Some of those pigeons who are deemed, the most reliable, the best flyers, they're going to be good for breeding, right? They send some of those over here to the States. And then at Fort Monmouth, they set up this massive pigeon breeding and training section, which they wind up doing amazing things in the few decades that they're in existence. They breed, again, the best, if you will, pigeons, but they train them to fly under cover of darkness. They train them to fly two-way missions. They come up, as I said, with different technology, like little cameras for them to wear, so that by the time we get to World War II, the pigeons are even more critical, more reliable than they had been in World War I.
More hero pigeons provided vital communications to the troops in World War II, including G.I. Joe, Yank, and Caesar. Advancements were made, including placing cameras on the pigeons to do surveillance pictures. The Pigeon Service was discontinued in 1957, when it was fully replaced by advancements in radio technology. Otto Meyer, the head pigeoneer, and others believed that the service was still useful. The hero pigeons were sent to zoos, other pigeons sold to civilians. Several hero pigeons, including Jeremy, were stuffed. She is now on display at the Smithsonian. During the Vietnam War, an officer requested to use carrier pigeons again. In his request letter, he says it would be ideal to use carrier pigeons to send messages between locations quicker. After the Signal Corps reviewed the request, it was denied because no need was seen for the reactivation of carrier pigeons.
This letter, it's written from a Vietnam era soldier, and he is writing back to the commander at Fort Monmouth, and he's like, listen, these radios you're sending us, all this fancy smancy new equipment, it's great, but you know what, the batteries die, and sometimes the guys can't figure out how to use the technology. Could we just get some pigeons?
Organizations such as the American Pigeon Racing Union have continued to race pigeons as a civilian hobby today, and although carrier pigeons aren't used as a form of communication on the front lines anymore, the French military still uses them for long-distance communication. Carrier pigeons served as a reliable form of communications for soldiers in World War I. They delivered messages that saved soldiers' lives. Pigeons continued to be used during World War II and the Korean War to a lesser extent, as new technology proved to be more reliable. Although carrier pigeons are no longer used in battle, hero pigeons like Cher will always be remembered for the heroic life-saving act.